Every November, around Thanksgiving time, we see food drives. We see collections for non-perishable items. We hear non-perishable items. What do you usually think of? You think of cans, things that are shelf stable, things that won't go bad for a long time. You might think, when did we as a people figure out how to do that and think, we need to keep food edible longer? When was that invented? It's actually not a strictly culinary invention. It wasn't cooks or homemakers who made canning possible. Did you know that canning is a military innovation? It is military technology you're using when you get your can opener open to open up a can. You see, in the 1800s in France, a certain man by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte wanted to conquer all of Europe. And he knew he couldn't stretch his forces across Europe. He couldn't get forces all the way to Europe unless he had food that wouldn't go bad. So cans were invented for that mission. Napoleon famously said, and he believed it, that an army marches on its stomach. An army marches on its stomach. You can't win the battle if your troops aren't fed. Simple as that. It seems in our text that Saul was not aware of this army axiom, was he? He makes this vow at the beginning of this morning text saying that he's willing to capture every last Philistine, kill every last Philistine, and to do so, no one's going to eat food until I get my vengeance. Saul wants the victory for himself. He wants victory, his own vengeance on his enemies. So he deprives his troops of food. Saul is showing that he is working just for himself. This is his mission. This is his calling. He doesn't care what happens to his troops. Jonathan, on the other hand, is not working alone. Jonathan, we see as the people proclaim, Jonathan's working with God. There are two approaches here we see of working alone, which becomes a tragedy, and working with God, which is what we are called to do. So as we look at these two examples that we see in this text of working alone, working with God, I want to last then work this out for ourselves. How do we apply the lessons we're learning from Saul and then secondly from Jonathan? It's kind of very simple order for us today, looking at Saul working alone, Jonathan working with God, and how we work it out. Because the main message for us here is that because Christ is really the one who does the saving work, because Christ is the one who saves us, we must work with him. We must not work against him or alone, separate from him. So understanding that Christ is the one who saves us, why is it so tragic to work alone? Let's see what Saul is making the mistake of here is that the Philistines here are retreating. Now, in the first part of chapter 14, we learned that the Philistines are retreating because of what Jonathan has done. But we think of battles, we think of the two sides clashing and fighting, but a lot of battle like that happens pretty quick, and then one side runs. And then the other side has to chase down the retreating side, right? That's an important thing to do, because you want to make sure your enemy doesn't regroup, regather, and strike back. It's kind of like the only thing worse than finding a spider hanging above your bed at night is trying to kill it and lose it. You want to find the spider at any cost. Doesn't matter if you have to burn down your whole house to make sure it's dead. You want to find it. That's what Saul is doing with the Philistines here. He wants to make sure he tracks down every last Philistine so they do not come back to strike again. Seems to be a noble mission, right? He wants to protect Israel. Is he protecting Israel? Is that where his heart is at here? It might not be so simple. You see, the text opens this morning, we find that the people of Israel are hard-pressed. Hard-pressed. You think, they must be hiding again. They're hard-pressed. They must be afraid of their enemies. No, the people are winning. The people are chasing down. They have the lead. They're winning. Why are they hard-pressed? Because Saul has put this oath on them. He is saying they cannot eat. They cannot stop in this pursuit. They cannot stop running until evening, or until, as Saul says, until I am avenged on my enemies. It doesn't seem to be a real efficient way to win. He's just thinking, all right, you guys, you cannot stop to eat until I get my vengeance. You see what he's saying? Until I am avenged on my enemies. Not until God is avenged on his enemies. Not until Israel has victory over her enemies. Me. This is about me. I am working for this vision, for this goal, and the rest of you, no, you can't eat until I win. What kind of leader speaks that way? Who is Saul fighting for? Is Saul fighting for God here? Is Saul fighting for Israel? It seems more that he is just dispatching the troops to fight his personal vendetta. He sees the threat of the Philistines as a personal threat. Why might that be? You might not be surprised because he seems to have taken the rebuke from Samuel last week. The rebuke of your family will not inherit the throne because you have acted foolishly. That, what Samuel said to him last week, he's taking that personally. You can almost see him saying, I'm going to show you, Samuel. I'm going to show you who the real king is, how much I deserve. My family deserves this throne. I want my name cleared. As a leader, he has not seen his own human troops. He's seen them as pawns on this chessboard to get his vindication for his own glory. To prove even to God, I'm worthy of the throne. Think of the Ironman race that we have in, just right over there in this town, usually every year. People swimming in Lake Monona, biking through South Verona, and, running as well. If you know anyone who's done that, you might know that they have little stations or very specific parts of the race where they have planned to eat. It might be like a little gel pack that they squirt just to get some protein in their mouth. Might be a little granola bar just to get some calories back in their body because they're burning like 2,000. I don't know how many they burn. It must be a lot. Because bodies need to replenish calories as you're running, as you're moving, as you're pursuing troops carrying a heavy shield and spear. You need calories. So why then would Saul withhold those necessary calories from his troops? Because he's not treating them like people. They're slaves for his vengeance. This is what working alone does. It changes how you see people. It devalues, it dehumanizes people. And so when the troops finally get to stop in the evening, and he lifts the ban because it's evening time, okay, you guys can stop, you can eat. The people just tear right into the food. They just kill the sheep and the oxen on the spot and just start eating it raw. I mean, not medium rare, not rare, but just bleeding raw. Because they're so hungry. And Saul speaks out against this. The law of Moses says you cannot eat the meat with the blood still in it. You need to sacrifice the animal. Let the blood drain out. And God has commanded that animals should be sacrificed this way. And so Saul, thinking of the law of Moses, thinking of God's law, what God has demanded, says, no, we'll not do it this way. Let's get the stone. Let's do this right. Let's follow protocols. So he rolls the stone, makes this altar. Great. Saul's doing what he's supposed to do, right? Last time he did a sacrifice unlawfully, but now he's following the rules. Great, right? The writer of 1 Samuel also points out at the end of that verse in 35, saying, by the way, this was the first time Saul's ever done this. It seems like as Saul is trying to prove himself, he's trying to really make sure he's doing all the right pious things. It's the first time he's done it. It's like a man buying flowers for his girlfriend after she's already broken up and left him. It's a little too late. He's rebuking the people over their haste in eating their food, their haste to kill the animals and not do the proper protocols. But do you wonder why they're doing that? I don't think you've ever been so hungry like that you've driven past a field of cows being like, I'll just eat it now. I don't need a grill. It's these people, they're so hungry. It says twice here, they were very faint. They were falling over. They don't have time to cook. They just need food. Who put them in that position? Who made them so hungry? Because some king is starving them. See, Saul's leadership, in the way he's working, thinking about his own personal agenda here, is putting these people in a situation where they have more of a tendency to sin. He's putting them in a compromising situation. And Saul should know he's also responsible for this. You see, Saul's self-centered vision of what victory looks like gets underlined here, really pointed out to us how alone he really is. Because as he doesn't hear God answering him, he doesn't hear the voice of the Lord, and he thinks, there must be some sin among the people, not Jonathan and me. If you read quickly, you might miss that, but that's why he wants Jonathan and him on one side and all Israel on the other. He wants to quickly rule out him and his son. But as he uses the Urim and the Thummim stones that were part of the priest's ephod to seek the will of the Lord, as he used those things, he quickly finds out it's Jonathan. That Jonathan is where the guilt falls. And so, Jonathan willingly offers up his life for the crime, the mortal sin of eating a little bit of honey. And as Saul says, yes, you will surely die, the people just jump in and say, wait a minute, what is going on? It's about honey, right? This is about honey? No, look at what Jonathan has been doing the whole time. Why are we in this position? Why are the Philistines running from us? Oh yeah, because Jonathan's been working with God. Because Jonathan has been bringing salvation. And because Jonathan eats honey, we have to kill him? No. Saul, no. His son, his nation, everyone has turned against Saul, realizing just how foolish he's being. How self-centered he's being. It takes his whole army and his own son to look at him and go, really? This is your decision here? And as he is shown for all of his work, all of his agenda to put him more and more alone, we see how fruitless all of his attempts have been in this chapter. He won't even follow through on the vow he made. He made this vow before God, I'll kill anyone who eats. Someone eats, okay, I won't kill you. Falls back on his vow, which is good. But then in 46, we see he falls back from the Philistines. He lets the spider go. He doesn't even finish that mission. His desire to work for his own motives makes him completely fruitless in his goals, as he realizes he's completely alone in his whole mission. Saul's utter failure to lead is really brought out to us here. And it's strangely contrasted with, because there are many other parts of this section where we see Jonathan's valiant labors, valiant deeds in battle. And Jonathan is seen as kind of contrast, isn't he? Because Jonathan is working with God. Jonathan works with God and proves the whole time this salvation that's been happening is because he has sought God. So let's move back to the story. We went through the story from Saul's perspective. Let's rewind and look at the story from Jonathan's perspective. You see, Jonathan didn't get the memo about the no eating. He didn't hear about that. His inbox was probably full of congratulatory attaboys due to him being the whole reason that they're winning right now. As the troops run through the forest, they start to hear the subtle sound of bees buzzing by their heads. Their noses start picking up that sweet, sticky smell of honey dripping onto the forest floor. That thick, sweet, sticky honey. The one place in their society where they can get just like sugar-rich meals. Remember when God promised Israel about the land of Canaan? It was a land flowing with milk and honey. This is what they smell in the air. And as their stomachs gurgle loudly, they know just with wide eyes, like I can't even think about it. I just need to look up, oh, nope, there's honey there too. I just got to look down. Oh, there's honey there too. I can't think because I can't eat or Saul's going to kill me. He's going to make an example of me. Jonathan simply just sticks out his staff, wipes off some honey, licks it. And I love the description here. I love how Scripture just slows down and gives us every little detail about what's going on. And says his eyes brighten. Have you ever seen a 1-year-old child at his birthday? Maybe he has like a smash cake or something, or his parents give him a little bit of cake with frosting. I love it because their eyes just go. Their blood sugar goes to a level it's never been in its life. As a kid's eyes just brighten like, wow, I need more of this. This is what's happening to Jonathan. He's been running for a while. His blood sugar's crashing. He gets a little honey. His eyes brighten up. And as his eyes widen, the soldier's eyes widen for a different reason. Because of the vow, the oath that Saul took. They say, Jonathan, you are in deep, deep trouble. Jonathan goes, trouble? No. My father is the one bringing trouble on the land. My father has troubled this land well enough. You know, trouble here, the word trouble is not just like a kid who, is in a little bit of trouble. Trouble is a really loaded word in the Old Testament. It actually appears only a few times. It appears when the people of Israel in Joshua are defeated at Ai, and it's Achan's fault. So they have to kill Achan because he stole some of the plunder. And they call the place where he was killed the Valley of Achor, the Valley of Trouble. In 1 Kings, Elijah and Ahab are having this kind of like insult off, like, you're the one troubling Israel. No, you're the one troubling Israel. Trouble, if you're troubling the land, you're bringing disaster. Not just like a sticky situation, pun intended, I guess. A sticky situation, but disaster. You're bringing shame upon everybody. That's what trouble is. That's some strong words from a son to his father, the king. Wow. Jonathan's got some hot takes here, doesn't he? But he's right, isn't he? Think about the situation that the troops are in. It's not good. Saul has brought trouble. It is a condemnation that Jonathan is pronouncing. And the truth is, Jonathan shows where his mind is at. He's looking how Saul's been leading and realizing this is bad for God's people. This is how Saul has been leading as king is bad for the people of God. It is bad for God's people. Jonathan's thoughts are on the people. Saul's are on his own. That's where we start to see Jonathan is working with God in mind and not himself. But even so, when the lot falls to him later and his guilt is brought up, Jonathan does fess up. He does confess. And he says, yes, I tasted a little honey with the tip of my staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I will die. You can almost hear him throwing his hands up, can't you, when you read that? Just, Dad, really? Is this what we're doing? Is this how far we're taking your vow? I mean, can you imagine a father saying, who ate the cookies? Who ate the cookies out of the jar? Who, fess up, you're going to die. Wow, that is an overreaction. That is not the punishment I would have expected for that. So here, as Saul's standing alone for this outrageous punishment, it is Jonathan who the people side with, turning against their king in favor of the son of the king, because what do they say? What do they say that Jonathan has done? We have salvation today because of what God's doing through him. Jonathan's the one working with God. That's why it says they ransom him from death. This is a really beautiful ending to the story, that the people see in Jonathan a desire to save him from death, because they know that Jonathan is the one who's serving God, who's working with God. It's kind of tragic, isn't it, though? Kind of ironic almost, that Jonathan is proving himself to be such a great hero. Don't you want to see Jonathan become king now? This guy who has the people behind him, who's willing to run out at the first line of battle and just win it all for Israel. Don't you want to see him be king? But what we read last week is he will never be king because of Saul's sin. It's sad, isn't it? It's ironic that we don't get to see Jonathan become king. This whole time we've been in 1 Samuel, we've been calling out our need for a better king. And even better than what kind of king Jonathan would have made is our King Jesus Christ. Because he was innocent of any crime. And yet he willingly took your trouble, your disaster, and your shame. He took our trouble. He took on our disaster so that we can walk and work with God. Before then, we're working not alone only, but we're working directly against God. Instead of putting us to death, Jesus puts himself to death for us, to redeem, to ransom us. I think it's so beautiful how the troops come around Jonathan and defend him and save his life. Jesus does both parts. He ransoms us and he conquers our enemies from coming death. He is Savior like Jonathan and ransoms us. We see those beautiful things and see Christ as both. And Jesus, rather, doesn't just do that, but he also succeeds where Saul fails. Saul lets the enemies get away. There's not one enemy, one foe, one struggle that Christ does not chase down and conquer. That if Christ actually conquers death itself, what enemies left are there? As you consider those threats, those struggles around you, know that your Savior who redeemed you also chases down every last foe. He works and walks with God because he is God. So what does that mean for us? I think we clearly see the better way of living, of working, walking with God, of course, not seeking to go it alone. But what do we learn about how we apply this? That if Christ enables us, if Christ empowers us to better work for him, how can we tell if we're working with God or working alone? Saul and Jonathan both, though related, teach us very different approaches. So let's consider those. I want us to look first at this vow that Saul makes. It calls us to really consider our own words, consider how we make promises, consider our own commitments. I mean, I know we don't speak in terms of vows. We don't speak like that. Often our promises become more, I really hope to. But we should speak with an integrity of our word. Mean to follow through with what we give our word to. God calls us to honesty, to integrity of speech. So we should consider that working with God means being honest in what we intend to do and not deceive or lead people astray or even overcommit ourselves. We should also consider what we ask and demand of others. We should be careful considering when we are asking something of someone, what are we really asking of them? Because Saul is only thinking about his personal goals, and he's not actually really thinking about the impact of what he's demanding will have on the people. He's not thinking that his strategy to win is just dehumanizing his troops. So those of us who are in positions of command over others, we should think about what we're asking. Now, there is a place and a reason where we should push people. We should seek to stretch people. But are we stretching and pushing people so we get the glory? Or do we push and stretch people because it's better for their growth and it enables them to glorify God? You start to see a little bit of a different approach there if we are thinking of their interest, of how they need to grow as well. You can still push people and stretch them, but think about it being for their good and not your glory. Because Saul pushes them to a place where they're put in a compromising situation. You see how they tore into the animals against what God had commanded? If we are demanding too much of people, we might be stretching them too thin to a place where they are forced to act beyond what they're capable of, to choose something that's not glorifying to God. We should think about the position we put people in. We shouldn't hard press them as Saul does, but push them to a place of growth. This calls us to think about, okay, what is the proper agenda? Yes, we shouldn't think about our agendas, our goals, our visions just being for ourselves. Well, then what should it be? Well, as Christians, among one another, we have the same agenda. We work together to work with God. We all have the agenda of glorifying Christ and building up his kingdom. That's what we're working together to do. And so we should seek to be encouraging that in one another. And if you are in a position of authority over people who aren't Christians, you can still be encouraging them to grow in what you're challenging them with. The good of them, the good of the people around them, because to seek the glory of God is to seek the welfare and the goodness of his creation too. To push them to a place where they can see Christ. That's what we're doing as Christians. You see also Saul not truly seeking the counsel of those around him. The people around him have no interest in really giving feedback. They all say, well, do whatever seems good to you. They keep saying, do what seems good to you. They're not giving feedback because they know Saul's not asking for it. They know Saul doesn't care what they think. He is just speaking his direction out loud. We should be humble enough to seek the godly wisdom of one another. If we truly are working together to glorify God, working to walk together, we should seek consulting with one another as well. And lastly, we see Saul's decision to make this sacrifice. It seems this act of piety, trying to prove himself as a good king. We should also think about our own hearts and our own acts of piety and worship. Are we doing these things out of an act of worship, or are we just trying to manipulate God to work for us? We should think clearly about our heart motives. Are we trying to make God work for us, or are we truly trying to live and work and walk for him? It's an important thing to think about our prayer and our service to the church. And we want others to see and to know that we're troops for God's kingdom. We're workers. We're builders for his kingdom. We shouldn't want to be seen as troublers. And sadly, many Christians at times conduct themselves more like troublers than builders, than workers. Seeing ourselves in a mission that we think only we can do, only we can fulfill. But we accomplished nothing on our own, because Jesus accomplished all for our sake. So we should work with him, receiving his vision, and striving to work and walk with God so that we're not thinking about living up our expectation of those around us. Jonathan shows that he is working for and with God, not seeking the approval of his father, not seeking the approval of others. Because we don't need to seek his approval because the work is finished. And we just need to continue running in the road that Christ has already paved by his work. The road to chase down the enemy is paved and the enemy is defeated. We just walk on the work of Christ, running well in his path that we're called to do. And the whole way, we're not called to be without sustenance, but Christ feeds us the whole way. Christ feeds us in his body and blood at the table of the Last Supper. Christ feeds us even now in the Word. We're not left without means of grace. We are equipped for the whole journey to work and walk after God, and he will feed you every step of the way. Let's go to him now in prayer, relying on his sustenance for us.